a conclusion anyone who has seen the bodies couldn't easily have missed. Yet when I talked to several members of the task force this week, it hadn't been the story that had caught the man's eye so much as the accompanying photograph of the column's author, Anne Jeffers. That was why the woman he'd spoken to a few minutes earlier had seemed familiar. She looked very much like the newswoman. He'd sat staring at the photograph for several seconds, considering. The woman had been in her early 40s, of medium height, with the same kind of even features reflected in the photograph. The woman's hair had appeared to be of a similar dark shade, too, though Anne Jeffers's was somewhat shorter. Was it possible it had actually been Anne Jeffers he'd spoken to? A patient man, he'd finished his coffee, refolded his paper, and gone on about his business. But he kept his eyes open, and a few days later, when he spotted the woman from the coffee shop, he realized that she was not Anne Jeffers, nor was she anyone else he knew. Discreetly, he had followed her. She lived not far from the university, in an old Spanish Moorish-style apartment building the man had always liked. Afterward, he made a point of walking by the building every few days. He'd seen the woman several times, and nodded to her. The dance had begun. It had gone on for several weeks, the two of them circling around each other in a strange pavane that was almost like a courtship. They began nodding to each other, then saying hello. He had begun to absorb the routines of her life, and found her, as he found most people, to be pathetically predictable. Today, for instance, being a bright and cheerful Sunday, he was almost certain the woman would take lunch in a bag and go to bask in the rare warmth on the lawn of the university, where she would pretend to be reading a book while actually watching for a man, nearly any man he had discovered, to show interest in her. Today, he would be the man to show interest. Today, the dance would end. He left his car at home that morning, taking the motorhome he'd bought 4 years ago, when the study had commenced. Perfect for field trips, he often drove it into the mountains, even on weekends when he wasn't working on his research, parking it near any one of hundreds of babbling streams while he indulged himself in his only passion outside of his project, fly fishing. Today he drove the motorhome up to the university, parked it in the nearly deserted depths of the cavernous garage, and locked it. Taking his own lunch and 2 bottles of lemon-flavored sparkling water with him, he climbed the stairs to the surface and started across the lawn toward the spot that was the woman's favorite. Half an hour later, after she'd consumed half the contents of the bottle of sparkling water he offered her, she frowned, then shook her head. "Something wrong?" the man asked, his gentle voice freighted with benevolent concern.
I'm not sure," the woman replied. "Suddenly I feel—"
She hesitated, then stood up.
"I'd better get home."
The man scrambled to his feet and began gathering both their things. "Maybe I should drive you," he suggested. The woman started to decline his offer, but a second later changed her mind. He could see that the color had begun to fade from her lips.
"If you could—"
she began, but then, feeling lightheaded and dizzy, her voice faded. Gratefully, she accepted the man's proffered arm and let him lead her down into the garage, where his motorhome waited. Even before he drove it out into the bright daylight, the woman had drifted into unconsciousness and was now spread out on the sheet of plastic he'd placed on the floor. He pulled out of the garage, went west 2 blocks, turned right up to Northeast 45th Street, and headed west to Interstate 5. Taking the highway south, he exited at Route 520, heading east toward Redmond. After a while, he wound up in the foothills, looking for the right spot. Somewhere off the road, somewhere secluded, somewhere near a stream, so he could do a little fishing after his work was done. Finally, he found the spot, a narrow road, one he'd used before, but not for years. A half-mile through the trees, and he emerged into a clearing next to a fast-moving stream. He looked around.